Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. There's been a lot of noise around Arsenal's pursuit of Martin Zubimendi, but the North London club regard the deal as done. We'll get into that and the transfers elsewhere as the mini window came to close on Tuesday night. Right, joining me today, we have the Athletics football correspondent, David Ornstein, and data and tactics editor, Duncan Alexander. Cheers for joining us, gents. David, let's start with you because the first of the two summer transfer windows is closed. Lots to discuss on this show, including the latest from Manchester United and Liverpool later on. Now on Tuesday, the second deal sheet dropped on the Athletic, packed with information on ongoing deals. And this week's one to watch is Arsenal's pursuit of Real Sociedad and Spanish midfielder Martin Zubimendi. Talk to us about this move because it feels as if we've been talking about this since mid last season.
Yeah, you could go back even further, Ayo, because Arsenal have wanted Zubimendi for more than 2 years, I think now. Liverpool made a move for him last summer. It didn't come to fruition. There have been rumours, reports about Real Madrid, others. I even remember Manchester City at one point when Rodri got injured. But ultimately, Arsenal have probably been the most consistent presence on this situation. And that's driven by Mikel Arteta, the manager, formerly a player at Real Sociedad, identifying Martin Zubimendi as a key player for his future as he builds his team and midfield. There's uncertainty over Thomas Partey, for example, and so that area was in need of being addressed. I think Arsenal's work on this in terms of intensive efforts really began last summer after the Liverpool move collapsed. And, Edu, Arsenal's sporting director at the time, was dealing with Real Sociedad over Mikel Merino. His transfer to Arsenal eventually went through, and no doubt there would have been some conversations about Zubimendi there, picked up by Jason Ato, who was interim sporting director after Edu's departure. And then Andrea Berta comes in around March time and he continues Arsenal's sort of plans for the summer. As far as we know, Arsenal regard this situation as done and even signed. They're expecting Martin Zubimendi to hook up with them for the start of pre-season, and they're now in the process of, I guess, completing this transfer. He has been pretty much silent on it, and even the comments he has made have not been entirely clear in terms of these suggestions that Real Madrid are ready to hijack it. I don't think what Martin Zubimendi has said has exactly played into that. And I suppose he's probably been respectful and quiet to the situation and the fact that he was on international duty at the time. And so, yeah, despite a lot of anxiety in the Arsenal fan base, every expectation we have is that Martin Zubimendi will be an Arsenal player. As I've reported for ages now, Arsenal have been acting internally and planning with him for the 25 to 26 Premier League season. And I think he'll be a crucial player for them in the Champions League as well as the domestic competitions. And our colleague Mario Cortegana has information from his sources in Madrid to suggest that actually they've never been actively pursuing this and working on a Zubimendi deal, despite the fact that they like the player, like probably every club in world football does. And Arsenal, I think, as and when they are able to announce this, which we think maybe in July for accounting purposes, that's the preference, I think, of Real Sociedad. And it looks like Arsenal may be paying over the 60 million euros release clause in order to be able to stagger the payments rather than paying them in one go. As and when they're able to go public with it, I think it will be a really significant moment for them and Mikel Arteta.
Okay, I guess the big one, Duncan, is where does he sit in this midfield? What does he allow this midfield to do on a tactical basis? I watched him for Spain with a recent match against France, and he looked very snappy. He looked quick. I mean, looked like he got himself a goal as well. So he's got goals in there as well. Where does he sit with this midfield on a tactical level?
Yeah, I think as David said, I mean, he kind of comes in that sort of Thomas Partey position, but I think he kind of as you pointed out, kind of adds a bit of everything, really. It's probably worth watching if you're interested in the highlights of that Spain-France game. I mean, he's quite risk averse on the ball generally, but then he can just pick a moment to sort of find a really incisive forward pass, which he does for both the first and the fifth goal for Spain in that game. So I think he kind of will bring some solidity. I mean, some of his stats don't leap off the page, but he's the sort of player that managers absolutely love. And, you know, a lot of Arsenal fans will be focused on other areas of the team, as we'll come on to this summer. But I think Zubimendi is the sort of player that comes into a side and just kind of makes everyone look better.
Yeah, what about the latest on the Partey situation? We know Jorginho has already signed for the Brazilian team. Partey, I'm not sure we know what's happening with that contract as yet. We know something was put on the table, but is there a chance that Arsenal potentially looking elsewhere for another midfielder if Partey does end up leaving, David?
Yeah, we broke the news before the end of the season that Arsenal had made an offer or were in talks with Thomas Partey to extend. However, they need to reach an agreement. And at the time of recording this, that hasn't happened. Clearly, with his contract expiring this summer, it leaves it open to uncertainty over whether that agreement will be reached or indeed he will depart. And so we'll stay across that one. There is no outcome just yet. We do expect one in the coming days, really, because it needs to happen sooner rather than later. And if Arsenal indeed don't keep Thomas Partey, then given the importance of that position, despite the arrival of Zubimendi, with Jorginho leaving, as you pointed out, for Flamengo, Arsenal, you would imagine, are going to have to dip into the market and recruit to replace a player who, despite a tumultuous time at Arsenal, disrupted by injuries, he is a top-level player, and he had one of his best seasons last time round. And it leaves a hole if he goes. And so, yeah, work continues on this. Nothing is settled. The intention was for him to stay. Let's see what the outcome is. And if he doesn't, then Arsenal are going to have to dedicate some time and effort and resources to plugging that gap.
Yeah, we talked about the sort of similarities to the likes of Thomas Partey, Duncan, but I'm wondering, he offers a little bit more, a bit different profile as well. And what does that mean for the likes of Martin Odegaard and Declan Rice, really, who we've seen surge forward now as a goal-scoring midfielder as well?
Yeah, I think it's going to be good news for both of them, really. I think in terms of Declan Rice, I mean, it will allow him maybe to play on the right a bit more, which, you know, he does enjoy drifting around. I think for Odegaard, he didn't have a good second half of the season, really, for Arsenal when he came back from injury. And the fact is that, you know, Zubimendi is excellent at sort of drifting from side to side, kind of being that spare man in possession, which creates space for others. And I think one of the reasons Odegaard was less effective last season was he was being closed down a lot more. People saw how good that sort of left-hand triangle with Saka and Ben White and latterly Timber was. So I do think that, as I said earlier, you know, add Zubimendi and you'll probably see a performance increase from a lot of other players.
Okay, right. Let's move on to another transfer target. You've also reported that Arsenal are close to finalising a deal for Kepa Arrizabalaga. How's that one progressing? Because this one came as a bit of a surprise, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think Arsenal would have been analysing their options for a second choice goalkeeper, with Neto returning to Bournemouth, ironically, where Kepa spent last season. And given the options available on the market, given Kepa's nationality, Spanish, Mikel Arteta, Arsenal's current goalkeeping coach, Inaki Kanya, and also their goalkeeper, David Raya, given the future at Chelsea not really existing for Kepa, given, I think, 4 goalkeepers in their ranks already, him being London-based, there's a lot of possibilities there that, you know, a lot of ways in which that could align. And there's a £5 million release clause in the contract extension he signed before going on loan. So relatively low cost for a high-level goalkeeper, of course, a record when he signed for Chelsea. So we believe that he has agreed to join Arsenal, and that means Arsenal will then need to pay the release clause. It's not done yet, to our knowledge, and they'll have to go through some steps. And you don't know if that's going to happen immediately or take a bit more time. But certainly it's a situation that has advanced and is being worked on. So that would fill one of the important positions for Arsenal coming into the new season, which is the second choice goalkeeper, the backup for Raya. And all indications we've had is that Kepa, despite being a number one last season in the Premier League, he is prepared to switch to the Emirates Stadium and fight for a place with Raya, even if that means nominally being number two. So we'll see how it sort of finishes, but that is the clear direction of travel, as we've reported recently.
Yeah, Duncan, some might see this as a bit of a coup at that kind of money, and also with the experience a player like that offers Arsenal. The original interest was in Espanyol's Juan Garcia, who now looks to be heading over to Barcelona for around 25 million euros. I mean, where does this lie in terms of, I guess, transfers on a tactical level for Arsenal? Because Kepa's a keeper who's quite temperamental, one, but also a keeper that backs himself too, but also a keeper, once again, who's, how can I say, susceptible to the odd mistake, let's say.
He is, but I mean, all goalkeepers are ultimately.
Yeah.
I think let's not forget that he's still the most expensive goalkeeper in the history of football, which, you know, he may have that tag for quite a long time. So in bargain terms, yeah, you're right, it is one. I mean, in terms of last season, he performed really well for Bournemouth. Only three keepers, Pickford, Matt Sales and Edison, had a better sort of goals prevented rate based on, you know, the XG on target rating of each shot he faced. So he is a good goalkeeper. I mean, obviously, Raya had to play a lot of games last season. Neto was even cup tied for the Carabao Cup. You know, Kepa would get chances. Obviously, he's got his own history, as you hinted at, with the Carabao Cup. Don't try and substitute him in the final, and you'll probably be fine. Yeah, I think if he's willing, as David says, to become, you know, a nominal second choice keeper, I think it's an absolute coup. Yeah.
Is this good pressure, David, for someone like David Raya, who obviously has performed very well at Arsenal, but actually we know a keeper like Kepa Arrizabalaga is a hungry guy. He's got his eye on number one. I'm not sure a keeper at that level is ready to sit as number two. Is this a good thing for David Raya?
Yeah, I think he'll be healthy. And Raya started his Arsenal career in quite shaky fashion, but has blossomed really at such a high level and big pressure. He's not perfect. Duncan rightly points out all keepers make mistakes, but the stats and the data speaks for itself, and also the evidence that we're seeing with our eyes. He's a crucial part of Arsenal's team, and I don't see him being displaced as the number one. Let's be clear on that. But to be pushed is important without having an unhealthy tension. And of course, you know, the situation with Aaron Ramsdale wasn't sustainable because he wanted to clearly be a number one somewhere, and he'd just been the number one at Arsenal. But this is different. Similarly, Juan Garcia, who Arsenal or Mikel Arteta had previously targeted and seems to be on his way to Barcelona. You know, he was Espanyol's number one goalkeeper, and he was prepared to come to Arsenal and sort of battle it out with Raya, which is a pretty good sign. And I know you'll hear people in football say that two number ones cannot coexist, and usually that is proved to be the case. But in the case of Kepa, maybe Arsenal will be falling on the right option for them, because he's at an age and stage of his career where maybe he doesn't feel it's as desperate a need to be number one as he might have done previously. Don't forget, he went on loan to sort of Real Madrid, didn't he, from Chelsea as well as Bournemouth, and it's not necessarily, you know, going in with the expectation of being number one. But what, you're playing 60 games in a season at a club like Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, FA Cup, League Cup, and so I think he'd get his fair share of game time, and that wasn't really something that Arsenal were willing to hand out last season. Maybe there was not the faith in Neto that Arteta or Arsenal would have liked, and it was a bit of a strange late transfer window signing Neto, wasn't it? It took up one of Arsenal's loan spots, and maybe they look back at that with a little bit of regret. But yeah, this one does feel a better fit, and I don't think Kepa, despite having, you know, ambitions of his own, I don't want to disrespect him, I don't think he's going to come in aggressively to try and throw Raya out of the net. Okay,
well, let's talk about other Arsenal transfer news. The big one, what's happening with Benjamin Šeško? What's happening to Viktor Gyökeres? I mean, that number 9 spot is still the one that's eluding Arsenal, and you know, everyone in the football, well, I said Premier League at least, is wondering what's going to happen this season. Are they going to start another season without a star striker?
Now, Arsenal are working on that critical position every day, and it's something that is so important that they can't sort of rush it, and these things are not as simple maybe as we in the public and the media might think or want to imagine. And they've got to get this right. It's been the big question, isn't it? Then Arsenal number 9 is almost like a bigger talking point than football full stop. And it's a boring answer, but it's ongoing. They'll be assessing their options. We know Sesko and Gyökeres and Watkins are high among them. And there will be so many different factors involved on the pitch, off the pitch, football, financial, transfer fee, structure within the transfer fee, add-ons, bonuses, player salary, add-ons, bonuses within that, agent commissions, and then the factors of how that person blends into their team, whether it's more important to sign a player who can hit the ground running immediately and help Arsenal fulfill their aim of winning in the short term, or whether it's more of a long-term view. I think there seems to be this sort of consensus around football, but that if they decide to go for the more long-term view, obviously you take the sort of investment, which is a younger player that could be useful now and for the longer term. And but then the numbers have to be right, of course, because if you're signing somebody with more of an eye on the future, then you might not want to be paying sort of Hollywood prices now. And then if you're looking for the more now option, maybe you don't mind paying a bit more and going for a slightly higher age. Listen, we see the reports about some conversations, dialogue with RB Leipzig, with the representatives of Sesko, and that's normal, right? That's what you're meant to do. I'd be more surprised if Arsenal weren't exploring all of that sort of stuff, and the numbers, release clauses, gentlemen's agreements, payment terms, etc. And it's similar with Gyökeres, with Watkins, and we're not aware of other candidates. Of course, Mikel Arteta for a long time had his eye on Alexander Isak, but that one, as we've reported consistently, doesn't appear to be one that can develop based on Newcastle having no interest in selling. And if they did, the price would be incredibly high for the transfer fee, for the salary, and so on. And it feels like it has come down to a really small pool of options. But you can't really put a time scale on it. I'm sure Arsenal will want to make developments this week, next week, as soon as possible. But a lot of work goes into this sort of thing, and we clearly don't have a conclusion just yet.
Yeah, something that's crossed my mind, Duncan, is actually we talk about number 9, but I'm thinking cover first one like Bukayo Saka, perhaps a wide forward. I know names like Rodrigo have been sort of thrown in. Kudus, another name that's been thrown in across the media. I mean, is that actually a pending position that Arsenal actually do need reinforcement in?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously Saka is the star man, really. I mean, but he's played almost 15,000 minutes of football in the Premier League under Mikel Arteta, which is the most of any player in that time period, which is obviously December 2019 to now, of any player who's still aged under 25. And he's kind of handled it pretty well. But obviously we saw last season that finally his hamstring gave up. And it was a long road back for him to come back from that. And I think on the other flank, it was obviously a kind of mixed season for Martinelli. He also had a hamstring injury, and Trossard. Both have got valuable skill sets to offer. I think Trossard sort of close up dribbling and creativity, and then Martinelli with his pace. But I think if Arsenal could get a player who kind of combines both those factors, I think that would obviously enhance their attacking play. It would obviously free up players elsewhere in the same way that Zubimendi would do. Rodrigo is obviously the kind of headline name, I think, there, and probably is maybe the most rounded, but someone like Nico Williams would be very much a sort of, Martinelli superpowered version, I guess, in terms of like finishing and sort of just directness. So in some ways it's very much a work in progress, isn't it? In some ways the striker kind of, that might inform who makes most sense out on the left going forward. So, I mean, this is why it's both a confusing time but exciting time for fans, because it's like, you want to see who and how your team will line up next season, and we will do in a couple of months. But yeah, I think it's basically making that attacking jigsaw more functional for Arteta, because defensively, out of possession, Arsenal are probably the best team in the world, but some of their attacks do fall down, particularly against sort of low block teams. I think that did cost them in the Premier League on numerous occasions last year, and did sort of stymie their title charge. So yeah, it's kind of the area Arteta has to fix this summer, and then they can push for the title next season.
Okay, really quickly on that, David, before Duncan has to go, any news on people like Rodrigo or maybe Nico Williams, have we spoken about in the past? That wide forward position surely is an area that Arsenal will be looking at as well.
Number 9 is Arsenal's first priority, but not far off that is this wide player. And you would imagine nominally to the left, but it's not impossible that somebody comes in who could play on both sides. That's why you had somebody like Leroy Sané, who was of interest, who can kind of operate on both wings. He's heading to Galatasaray. Arsenal were keen on him. Don't think he was their top priority, and that's why maybe they were taking a bit of time. And Leroy Sané decided that he wanted to move on quicker, which is totally understandable. And there were other suitors in for him as well. I don't think there is anyone much higher in their thinking in terms of what we've seen over the last more than a year, I think, than Nico Williams. And we need to pay close attention to that situation because, although it seems that he has been linked with moves, Barcelona, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool, others for such a long time now, and always stayed at Athletic Bilbao, that doesn't mean that can't change. And we did report, I think it was in January, that Williams might be more open to a move in the summer of 2025 than he was previously. There are complications around the release clause needing to be paid in one go, in around 60 million euros, a high salary now and an even higher expectation, which is a complicating factor, especially when so many clubs are trying to bring their wage bill down. But then you have somebody that clearly also has admirers inside Arsenal, Rodrigo. However, the noises are that he has to have a conversation first with Xabi Alonso, understand where he fits into plans at Real Madrid. If there is a possibility of a departure, there'll be many clubs in for him, I'm sure. No doubt Arsenal would look at the situation, but what about the finances involved, transfer fees, salary commissions, and so on? That one actually, if you look at the Williams initial outlay of the transfer release clause and salary, somebody like Rodrigo could be more cost effective in the immediate term, in terms of being able to do installments or whatever, than in the longer term if the transfer fees higher. But this is all hypothetical at this moment in time. Like, admiration is very different from a move developing. And I think our colleague Mario Cortegana has reported that Mikel Arteta loves this player. So yeah, we clearly need to keep an eye on that. So this is really a situation that Arsenal are sort of actively working on after the number 9, and I would expect somebody to come in this summer, but there's a long time ahead, and I'm not going to try and be so wise as to predict who it might be. And then they'll start to work on other stuff, such as the midfield, which we've discussed already. The goalkeeping position is already moving along. They did, of course, go in for Dean Howson at Bournemouth, and it didn't materialise. So do they try and bring in another centre-back at some point? They've definitely looked at candidates for that position. 2 left-backs may leave in terms of Tierney's gone and Zinchenko. There's a possibility for him to depart. If he does, do they stick with Calafiori and Lewis Skelly, or do they look to bring somebody in there? Otherwise, they seem to be pretty well set. But they do need to look at contracts as well, so it's not a quiet time at the Emirates. Off the top of my head, Saka, Saliba, priorities. But you've also got like a Ethan Nwaneri who needs to be addressed too. So not a small amount on the in-tray of Andrea Berta and co.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Duncan, I know you got to go, but thanks for joining us, and more to come from David as well. Okay, well, Manchester United have made an opening offer that valued Mbeumo at 45 million plus 10 million in add-ons, which Brentford rejected. Now, you've spoken about Mbeumo already, David. Are United prepared to make a second bid? But more importantly, do they have the money? It hasn't been a great season for them.
Yeah, we revealed the opening bid, and from then on, I don't know if it's bids or just an ongoing conversation. And of course, the numbers change as as they go, like in any of these situations. They want to sign him. Those discussions are ongoing. He wants to join them, which was clear, and it's how the ball really got rolling on this situation. And it doesn't sound like he's for turning. So it's a great opportunity there for Manchester United. But Brentford aren't just going to roll over, understandably so. He's got 2 years left on his contract, but that's made up of 12 months and then an option to extend. So it puts Brentford in a strong position. But of course, most clubs with 24 months left decide to either renew the player or sell. It doesn't look like a renewal's on the card, so perhaps a sale does materialise. We'll keep across that one. Manchester United had the money in place without needing sales for Matheus Cunha, £62.5 million. It was a release clause. It seems that Brentford are trying to get around that figure, maybe a bit more, for a player in Mbeumo who has superior statistics, at least last season, to Matheus Cunha, although Cunha had longer left on a new contract that he'd just signed. So there's so many things to weigh up here. They also had money in place for a second signing that was initially going to be Liam Delap. He chose for Chelsea. That would have been a £30 million release clause. So Mbeumo would be higher, but clearly the finances were in place for those first two signings. So can they stretch to that being Cunha and Mbeumo like it was going to be Cunha and Delap? I've had no reason to suggest they can't. Obviously, if the price that Brentford asked for goes so high, they're gonna have to sort of consider things very carefully, Manchester United. But there is resource there. And after these initial two deals, that's the point at which we're being led to believe that sales will be required. And we know the candidates, the likes of Rashford and Sancho and Antony and Malacia and Garnacho. Let's see what happens with other players such as Casemiro and Arna, Kobe Mainu. I think they would like to continue with him, but there's a contract situation there. So a lot to sort out. And then Manchester United, of course, haven't filled that number 9 role either, post Delap. And so been heavily linked with a player we've already talked about, Victor Gyökeres. But let's see what develops. I'm sure they'll be looking at a number of options and trying to make the finances work. There's a lot that's been written on The Athletic by my colleagues about how Manchester United are financing their ambitions this summer, and we're assured that they're confident of complying with FFP this year and next year. I'm not going to go into the detail of it now. I would urge people to go and have a read of it, and it is very interesting. But yeah, there seems to be, despite Manchester United lacking European football and all the strife they've been going through, all the cost cutting and redundancies, etc., that there is some money to play with, and that means it will be a pretty busy summer at Old Trafford.
Okay, let's move on. Well, because on Saturday, Liverpool submitted an improved offer of €134 million, that's around £113, to sign Florian Wirtz from Bayern Leverkusen. Okay, what have been the developments on that one? Because if this one goes through, wow, what a player Liverpool have got.
Yeah, every expectation is that this will be completed. It's on track, and the negotiations between Liverpool and Bayer Leverkusen are really at the final stages, and they're in contact daily to try and reach an agreement. So I'm just trying to think back to the genesis of this. Florian Wirtz was always going to be a player who was arguably going to be one of the biggest transfers of the entire market, and it may well now materialise like that, because it felt like the end of a cycle at Bayer Leverkusen, and maybe the right time for him to leave, following obviously Jeremy Frimpong and Xabi Alonso most notably. There was an assumption that Germany's number 10 playmaker would end up going to Bayern Munich, and they did want to do it. Manchester City then came into the frame, and the word coming out of the Etihad Stadium was that they weren't prepared to meet the finances involved. Others have said it was Wirtz who chose that his future lay elsewhere. Maybe it was a bit of both. We reported that his decision, his preference was Liverpool, and that they were ready to push hard and above what they've ever done before, which would take them to a club record outlay if the figures that it's trending towards are going to be realised. It will be the biggest sale in German history as well. The asking price is said to be 150 million euros. Liverpool are adamant that they're not going to go to 150 million euros and that they'll reach an agreement at a lower value. My understanding is that all this is onto now is really the structure of the deal, the add-ons, bonuses, the payment terms, and a huge portion, around £100 million, is going to be guaranteed. And that's not insignificant. And then the add-ons after that have still got to complete the whole package. But there's already reports of agreements being reached. The word coming out of all the parties involved was not quite there, but no suggestion that this isn't going to happen. To the contrary, every suggestion that it is, and they're going through these last hurdles, and then as and when they can, presumably they'll get him over for a medical and complete what would be a box office signing. We're going to get the popcorn out as always, Ayo, and feast on Florian Wirtz, because he's such a talent for club and country.
Yeah, this is both sweet and salty popcorn for me, because honestly, if Liverpool get Wirtz, goodness me, who knows what the Premier League's going to look like next season. Right, very quickly, Kerkez, what's going on with that? And also, if they do manage to secure Frimpong, Wirtz and Kerkez in one window, what a window for Liverpool. But is that them done spending as well?
Yeah, Kerkez remains an ongoing situation. He was top of their wish list for a left back for quite some time, and they've just got to reach an agreement with Bournemouth. I think the player part is absolutely fine. He's very enthusiastic about joining Liverpool, but Bournemouth want £45 million, and doesn't sound like they're there yet. But there's no expectation that it's not going to happen. I think it is. Again, we just need to let these things play out, and then he'll be another impressive recruit to Anfield. So yeah, you say Frimpong, Kerkez, Wirtz. It's not a bad start. I think you could see a striker come in at number 9 position if Darwin Nunez leaves. And I reported in recent days that Al Hilal in the Saudi Pro League contacted Liverpool, made an inquiry to understand the conditions of a potential Darwin Nunez move. I think the word that came back was very clearly that we turned down 70 million from Al Nassr in the January transfer window. And so that's the sort of level that they would expect. Darwin Nunez's goal scoring record is not bad at all. And especially if you compare him to some other number 9s forwards in the Premier League and around Europe. But clearly the move hasn't worked out as spectacularly as all parties would have hoped for. We know that Liverpool are among the teams that have held admiration for Alexander Isak, but we think that he's going to be staying at Newcastle. We've seen them linked to the likes of Hugo Ekitike at Eintracht Frankfurt, and there'll be other options if indeed they are going to dip into the market. Again, other stuff will depend on potential outgoings. What happens with Luis Diaz? Does he leave Liverpool? Certainly they're planning with him, and they've tried to sort of quell the noise around potential departures. But there is a situation there because there's 2 years to go on his contract, and he's not had a new one since joining from Porto in January, I think, 2022. And Barcelona have inquired about him, as I reported recently, and were given a very clear pushback. They were rebuffed. But he continues to be linked with them, with the Saudi Pro League. So if he was to depart, does somebody come in? They were another team who pursued Dean Howson of Bournemouth. So does that show that they're looking to recruit at centre-half, or was that just seen as a market opportunity? Ibrahima Konate approaching or going into the last 12 months of his contract with no news on a new deal. So does he get sold? Does he go into that final 12 months like other players have at Liverpool over the last year? They've got the goalkeeping situation with Kelleher now gone to Brentford and Mamardashvili coming in to presumably rival Alisson. What happens with Harvey Elliott? Because he didn't play much last season and he has a lot of admirers out there. So I do think there are still plenty of moving parts at Liverpool, and it'll be fascinating to see how it all fits together as they look to launch their title defence.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, let's leave it there at the end of the very small transfer window ahead of the Club World Cup. But please do keep your eyes on the deal sheet all across the Athletic over the next few weeks for more from David and others. Gents, thank you so much for joining us, David and Duncan. And also thank you guys for watching as well. Don't forget to like the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And leave us a cheeky comment with your thoughts as well. That's it from us. We're back soon. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.